Okay, so hi, my name is Isabella, and my dad was born and raised in Italy, specifically like Como, and my grandma on my mom's side was from Tokyo, Japan. I definitely felt more connected to my Italian side always, just because I had a very Italian father in my household. He was constantly there. His culture was hard to ignore just because he is violently Italian. My mom, she was born and raised here in the States, California. So she was very much just like California girl. She embraced the American culture. So I'd only really experienced the Japanese side when I would hang out with my grandma, which was still a lot, but not all the time, like with my dad and my Italian side. It kind of influenced my interests because I studied abroad in Korea, and then I moved to Italy, and then specifically Europe and East Asia were just always on my radar because that is, the cultures I come from. So I always prioritize those two. I mean, they definitely did feel separate, but I would never say they conflicted. They never like clashed in any way. It was just like kind of two parts that made up me. I mean, the fact that my dad moved to the US in his 20s and started a whole life here, it made me realize that I really wanted to try moving abroad and kind of doing something similar. So that's why I was living in Italy and how I met Jay. So, yeah, it made me just really want to explore more of the world. My dad, he came here for work, which initially was something he did for himself, but that eventually turned into something that he was doing for his entire family because he very quickly decided that he wanted to be able to put me and all three of my brothers through college if we decided to do that. He wanted to be able to help us do that financially. So he really committed and set aside money, and he was able, to help us out with our education, which meant sometimes penny pinching and all that. So
What traditions from each side stood out to you the most?
when it comes to both, I would definitely just say the cooking, which is might be a basic answer, but my grandma, she was very traditional in the sense where she had certain foods she associated with good luck. Every year on New Year's we'd eat mochi, and that was good luck for our family. And then my dad, he loved to cook, and everything he cooked was always some sort of pasta, like some variation of pasta. So um, mostly the cooking is what stuck, because other than that, my families, they really wanted to kind of assimilate it to the American culture, so that was the one that they kind of just every single day I would still experience. I always kind of surrounded myself with friends that also had very like diverse cultural backgrounds. A lot of my friends were also mixed too, so even though obviously the cultural differences were there, just that kind of like overarching theme that, like, yeah, we had very diverse backgrounds. We always had that in common. Yeah, I would say I would mostly talk about my dad and him being from Italy. I would mention how I had a grandma from Japan, but I had a harder time like accepting that as my culture. And it wasn't until I met someone else who was only a quarter Asian. She was a quarter Filipino. I was like, oh, you fully identify with that? And she's like, of course I do. It's just like another part of me. And I was like, oh, I should probably start doing that too. So always very Italian. It took me a little longer to be like, yes, I'm also Japanese. I don't know. I always felt very Italian. On my Japanese side, sometimes I was a little more shy to claim it just because I am only a quarter. But then I just got more comfortable and I realized, my grandma was born and raised in Japan. I grew up with a lot of the traditions, so I became more like, oh yeah, I am Japanese.
If you could tell your grandma something about her journey,
I guess I would just say thank you. Thank you for moving to this country with my grandpa, for giving birth to my mom, for being so supportive when she met my very Italian foreigner father and being okay with all that. Uh, I guess just a lot led to me being here, which I'm grateful for. Being American is just the age-old saying, it's a melting pot. The fact that I am from two very unique cultures, no one blinks an eye at it. I tell them I'm Japanese Italian. It's not like, whoa, what? It's like, wow, that's really cool. And then we move on because that's the country we live in.
My father came in the early 1950s to the US. At first, he didn't want to become a citizen because he was very patriotic to his country. And he's of Spanish and South American descent. But then once he got his citizenship and realized, all the rights that he was going to have, he was recommending it to all his friends and relatives. Yeah, he really believed in that U.S. citizenship. My mother was the first to become a U.S. citizen. She came in the 1940s with her pharmacist brother, and she was a pharmacy tech, helping him in his pharmacy. My parents' journey was one of very hard work. They were workhorses. They worked 7 days a week, 12-hour days, and because they weren't professional and they really didn't have a trade, they did what they knew best. My father was an importer of South American artifacts, and my mother was a home economics teacher in her country, and she used her skill to help my father in his business. And she would make decorations for Panama hats early in the morning. And when I was in school, for the most part, she was a housewife. So she was doing double duty, being a housewife and also helping my father in his business. So they worked very hard and they worked very long hours, and they invested all of their money in my education. My parents really struggled with the language, even though my mother was proficient in Spanish. She was born in the Dominican Republic, though her race was Lebanese. Her parents were immigrants from Lebanon. She grew up with Arabic and Spanish, and she also spoke some French. When she learned English, she never became proficient. So I watched her struggle with the language with a very strong accent, my father as well. And I think that was a big limitation in their potential and what they could achieve in their business. As a matter of fact, I did. I started at a very young age when I was 5 years old. And I was put in very challenging situations translating material that I didn't even know about. Sometimes legal documents that didn't make any sense, and I did the best I could. But my parents relied heavily on me. I guess they thought very highly of me and thought that I could do it. Was translating in a variety of situations that they found themselves in, not knowing the language proficiently. They knew enough to defend themselves, but when it came to reading contracts and the like, they didn't know what to do, and I was there, and they thought I could do it, and I did the best I could. My mother came from a professional family, even though she only went to the 11th grade because her father passed away. And so she would have recurring nightmares of not being able to finish school. So she emphasized, and so did my father, they both emphasized education. And everything that they did was for that purpose, to ensure that I would get a good education. And I knew it, so I did the best I could in school. I had a rough start because I had a lot of discrimination in the early years. Even teachers expected me not to succeed. So I became an overachiever. So by the time I was in the 9th grade, I became an honor student. And from that point on, I joined CSF, and I graduated in the top 5% of my class with highest honors. So yes, I felt that I needed to be there for my parents and do what they weren't able to do. It was probably in the 4th grade. I changed schools. I grew up in East LA up until the 4th grade. In the middle of the 4th grade, I went to a school in Montebello, Washington Elementary. And it was predominantly Asian, Armenian, mixed with Anglo-Saxon students, and a lot of Hispanic students. And so there was discrimination there as well. There was a lot of bullying and a lot of oppression, racial discrimination. My hair color was black back then, and my eye color was brown, and so it was insinuated that I was Mexican, which meant I was inferior at that time. That's what it meant. It was used in a derogatory way. And, I was made fun of, lots of rude jokes. And so it affected me. I didn't try very hard in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And my 6th grade teacher even contributed to that, asking me one time that I bumped into him in junior high. I don't know what he was doing on my campus, but he was there and said, "How are you doing? Average?" And from that point forward, I thought, okay, I've got to pick myself up. And I am not an average student. I'm well above average, and I became an overachiever. Like I said, by the time I reached the 9th grade, I was an honor student. And from that point on, it was always at least on the honor roll, and then CSF, and I went to college, and so on and so forth. I noticed that we were different than others when my parents left me with a neighbor around the corner who was my best friend. She was from a Japanese family. And this Japanese family took me in, and I lived with them for up to 3 to 4 weeks at a time when my parents were at trade shows or they were at county fairs, and they couldn't come home at night. So I would spend the night there. And I noticed that their culture was much different than mine. They were 6 in the family. They rotated chores, whereas I didn't have any chores. But they incorporated me into the family. They treated me like one of their own. And I learned a lot from them. They were straight A student, very driven academically, and I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be accepted. And so my grades improved significantly because of that exposure. They did everything by the clock. They had really good time management skills, and I incorporated that as well. Am I going to be pulled over and harassed and detained and asked to see documentation? So, to the present, I carry my birth certificate with me, copy of my passport on my cell phone. I even went as far as getting the real ID, that only citizens are able to get. I was born in San Francisco. Both parents are U.S. citizens. They were at one time immigrants, but they had green cards, and it always came legally. Once they became U.S. citizens, that was that. So I would tell them that I'm very appreciative. I would tell them thank you, and it was well worth what sacrifices they made.
Okay, so but I just got more comfortable because my grandma was from Tokyo, Japan. Why did I
Okay.
on my radar, because those are, meow, meow.
That's going in the bloopers.
Now.
All right. Now, more broad for you and Lala.
Okay.
What does being American mean to you?
What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to another crazy video. Okay, we're done. No,
Done, basta.
Yay!